Welcome to The Roadmap. We are your hosts, Gogo.
I'm Coach.
And we're here to have real conversations with people whose successes you may know, but whose stories you probably don't.
We're connecting with the mentor, the founder, the artist, and the builder to uncover the personal journeys that they have taken.
No business roadmaps, no project roadmaps. This is the roadmap of your life, and we're here to explore it with you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Roadmap Podcast. I am your host, Gogo, and my fellow host, Coach, aka Steve, is here with us today. We have a very exciting guest, Kevin Henrickson, your CEO of Dust Labs. And this is such an honor for us. Kevin is a good friend, and he is an incredibly powerful mentor in the crypto space. And what we really want to talk to him today about is how he got to this position in his life. He really, really inspires so many people in Web3, but also outside of the Web3 and NFT space. And we really are so happy to talk to you today, Kevin, and learn more about you, how you got to your position today. And, we really are excited to have you. So how are you today, Kevin?
I'm awesome. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to, talk about whatever and, learn more about what you all want to ask.
I think it's interesting, again, because, CEO of Dust Labs, you are all over the place. And as we were chopping it up before, right, like you're surrounded by such a multitude of people, and different varying ages, varying spaces, all that stuff. But like, I think what we want to kind of start with is kind of the genesis, like who is Kevin? Where'd you start? Like, let's go right now. Like, where are you at right now? What's going on?
Yeah, I am in the Bay Area. So just between San Francisco and San Jose in California. We're building a bunch of stuff with DeGods and y00ts, and then Dust Labs sort of powers the software behind those two NFT collections. And I think for us, it's a really busy time as we're sort of on the technical side looking to do the migration and figuring out how we're going to sort of move from Solana to Ethereum and Polygon. And then that brings a lot of just both excitement, but also a lot of work to sort of figure out partners and how that's going to work. And then a bunch of new sort of folks on the ecosystem side.
Yeah. Wow. And that's for anybody that's in Web3 and paying attention, like that's been some of the biggest news, right? And I know, Gogo, I heard you, like, we'll make sure we get on over to you. But you haven't done that. Like, this hasn't been your whole life. Like, and again, I don't know, as much as you're comfortable, I kind of want to, like, can you shed some light on like the early years, kind of where you started and kind of how you, again, essentially the roadmap of how you got to here, and wherever you're comfortable starting, I think that it's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah. I can go. I got my first computer as a kid. And I forget which one. I think it was the Packard Bell was like the first one my dad brought home. But before that, we had like, some computers at school, like Apple IIs and things like that. But I think none of them were really connected to the internet. And then we sort of got modems and again, but it was crazy. So my dad brought it home and like the box just sat there. And, he obviously didn't grow up with computers really. And so he was like, you guys read the manual. And so we like spent a week just reading the manual, me and my two brothers and my sister. She was probably younger, so it's probably just the three of us. And then he's like, all right, after a week, he's like, go for it, just open it up. And then like we sort of figured it out, and like it was all just self-taught, self-learning, and it was really fun. And I remember the first program I wrote was we had hundreds of pigs. So I grew up on a pig farm, and so we had hundreds of pigs. And I wrote a software program to sort of like try to track all the names of the pigs and like who was having babies and how many did they have and how long have they lived, how much do we feed them, when did they get medicated. So we had to track like if a pig got sick or something, how it was medicated and then for how long. And then you had like confinement periods and stuff of like if you gave the medicine, you couldn't eat that pig for a while. It had to like, flush its body out of whatever you gave it, Combiotic or something. And so I wrote a simple software for that. And it was back in the days where you would write software was like all basic. So you just type these like and then save them on like little tape drives, like super old. And so like that was my first, sort of, experience with computers. And then, in college, I went to UCLA, and it was like, oh, you have internet, like you plug in and it's like wired and fast, and like, oh, this is kind of amazing. And then, so it sort of, quickly grew from there. And song swapping was a big thing back then, MP3s. And
before you go past it, what was your medium of choice to get your MP3s? Because I was at the same age.
Yeah, so we had Napster, but then we did like LimeWire, and then there was Bear Share or something like that. That we used that to share. But the thing that was crazy is there was this. Travis, the guy that started Uber, was like a couple years ahead of me in the dorms, and so he had built this thing called Scour, which was, if you go back in history, he had built this music MP3 sharing site, and that started at UCLA because it would basically just scour all the drives, looking for people that had shared like C:MP3, and it would just scrape them all into an indexer. And then you basically could have like the entire school's MP3 thing of everybody shared together, and it was all local. So it was super fast, and you could copy it around, and ended up, leaving the dorms because it melted the network. And then, they got sued by a bunch of people. So there's a whole bunch of stories on that. But super interesting experience of seeing like the startup version of like grow really fast, and then have a bunch of my friends work for him at a time. And it was kind of cool. But so that was my sort of MP3 sort of minute for a few minutes that I chased that.
Like the local version of Napster, kind of just taking off the ground there.
Yeah, basically it was like Napster, but it was all through the LAN. So it was like, Napster would take time to download and run, and it was just instant because you're on like essentially local network.
Wow. Whoa. You guys were enterprising back then.
That's impressive.
From a very young age. I love it.
Yeah, I don't know about that. It was just, they're kids, right? And so it was between that and probably video games or something. We'd play some like, multiplayer type stuff. But it was mostly sports games, I guess. We played a lot of baseball and football.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was young I didn't use Napster as much as LimeWire, but then all the news started coming out around that time, like, oh, people are getting sued for downloading MP3s illegally. And I thought, oh God, if they show up at my parents' address, what's happening? No, but yeah, that was a time. Yeah. That was a moment in time, Kevin.
Yeah, we got letters. We never had anything. I think the worst we had was actually when we moved out of the dorms. We would get them from our internet provider. So I forget who we had in like the apartments outside of UCLA there, but we would get letters in the mail that said, hey, we're going to have to shut your internet down because we've detected that you're sharing songs because you're running a LimeWire node or whatever. And so like, we just stop. You switch ports or something, and then it goes away. In 90 days, you get another one. And then you move out because it's summertime, right? So like, it never really impacted it. But then it finally, I don't know when that died. It just kind of became a sense. So you had all the songs you wanted, and then I guess you just, you weren't sharing at that point. You were trading like, the Apple pods at that point. You're like, hey, here's my block of songs, just copy somebody else's. You weren't really in the motion of like downloading stuff anymore.
Good times. Yeah, exciting.
But it definitely get my OCD. Yeah, I had this notion where I was always like trying to label everything perfectly, and that was like a huge thing of like trying to like get all the dupes out, and labeling was like a big thing that I spent probably way too much time on.
Are you a perfectionist, like in that nature?
I'm not a perfectionist. I think I have things where I like things organized in my own little way, and like, so I don't know if it's that or just kind of a little more OCD, like just want it to be my way. And so I try to organize things, try to get to inbox zero. Like I definitely have my biases in terms of like trying to drive my own productivity, but it's probably not for the most productiveness. It's just my own sort of sense of organization.
Will it help? I mean, it helped you at a very early age on the farm. You developed your own software. So where do we go from there? From a very young age, you were introduced to computers. You used that, introduced technology, and now you're in college using that sense of deep organization, wanting to, matriculate all your information, get that even in your hobbies. So post-college, what do you do with that kind of drive?
Yeah, so I kind of transitioned in college to working. So I applied for an internship, but it was a job posting, and I wish I would have saved the job posting, but I thought I was applying to work at some software company as like an intern. And I guess I applied for a full-time job, and we never really communicated until I got the offer. And it was like, hey, here's your offer for full-time employment in the summer. And I was like, oh, I haven't graduated. So I'm like, I'll just take it. And I went and worked all summer. And at the end of the summer, I was like, hey, I got to go back to school. And at the time I was like, HTML engineer, just building websites for them. Then I was managing their front end team at that point when I left after 3 months. And I was like, I went to my boss or whatever. I was like, hey, I got to go back to school. And he's like, what? And I was like, oh, I haven't graduated. Like, I just thought this was like a summer job. And he's like, wait, but you're running this area. And I was like, all right. And I worked at FedEx on weekends loading boxes. And I worked at the software company during the day. And then I was like, well, if I take classes 2 days a week, so I'll go to class on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I could work for you guys like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because I have a weekend job and I just work a little longer hours. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And then like a year goes by and they go, hey, have you graduated? I was like, oh yeah, I graduated like 6 months ago. And they're like, oh, are you going to come back to like working 5 days? And I was like, well, yeah, because the other 2 days I was just doing side projects and like building my own little fun apps and stuff. So yeah, so sort of got into the whole startup building cool things. And then when that company went out of business, like .com's kind of 99 type of time frame, moved to Silicon Valley and then have been here, up here for 20 some years.
I mean, like that, you were the serial entrepreneur from the beginning, right? Like, or just trying to figure things out, how you kind of make things work, right? And I'm wondering, because again, we'll go to like what happened after that, but like, how did you? Because again, we've all been in college, right? Like, my mind was not wired like that. I can't. Like, I was drinking, I was doing all the stuff that I thought I was supposed to do, and then fell on hard times, do all that stuff, but like. It sounds like your college career and college life was a little bit different. How did you approach it?
Yeah, it's weird because like I had roommates that were in frats and like parties and stuff. And this is interesting. So like in UCLA, it's very hard to get a car on campus the first couple of years because it's hard to get parking. And they were like, and I'd heard that said, hey, if you have a job, then that would be like higher priority to get parking. And then they said, the farther your job away, the better you'll get parking. And so my dad was like, why don't you just say that you still work on the farm? So I just put in the zip code that I worked on the farm, which is, 7 hours away from LA. And so the algorithm worked. And so I always had a parking, and I had like parking like in the dorm where there was like 30 parking spots across from the dorm. And then I had this big old Suburban that was ginormous from farm vehicle. And so it was great for like hauling people around. And I got a lot of like, hey, go pick up things and move stuff around for all my buddies in the frats. And so I had a lot of access to like all of the sort of like social parts of like the frats and events on campus and things like that, because I had a car and it was very close to the dorms. And so, for me, like I always thought of that as like, there was a big time investment to go do the social aspect of like, rushing or going through it. So I would reach to the point where I'm like, all right, this is going to just take more time. I'd rather go do something else. And I had like a little embroidery business where I was doing like computer embroidery at a machine that would like embroider like sweatshirts and stuff. And I would sell them to like the sororities and fraternities and to like social groups on clubs on campus and stuff. And so like I just loved the idea of like the business model of solving that. And I, setting up, I had like a local tax license for Westwood and like, like buying thread in bulk it was just fun, like being a wholesaler and had business cards printed up. And that part of it just got me always excited. And so I think the college piece, like I did, a reasonable amount of fun in college, but I would stay up many more late nights working on my projects or these companies that I was kind of playing with, the embroidery business being the biggest one. That was just more exciting to me. And I think even today, like I find myself working the latest nights. I was up this morning really early doing email. To me, like the business part of it is just very attractive and fun.
So the whole time, I mean, I think what I'm getting from you is that what drives you is find solutions for problems or just product market fit, even in social arenas. Like, you can see that people would be excited about repping merchandise that has to do with clubs, fraternities, just social gatherings. That was something exciting to you. It sparked an idea and no one was filling that need. So you started a business. What was it that drove you to do business with people in the, kind of tech industry and apps and everything? Like, what got you excited about doing that?
Yeah, that kind of, I mean, I always was excited about computer. Like the more I got access to computers and especially like the internet in college, like that I loved spending time on the computer, I think, and it was fun. Again, probably earlier with like songs and gaming and things like that, but very quickly it went to like, how do you make money doing this? And I think I went to college to be a mechanical engineer. So like, I was always like, oh, I want to, like, auto shop was my favorite class in high school and drafting. And so I was like, oh, I could build airplanes and cars. And I know some teacher was like, you should be a mechanical engineer. And I wasn't even Google at the time. I looked it up. My dad's like, oh yeah, it's really hard, but like, it sounds cool. I'm like, all right. So that's what I applied to college in and got in, because I was like, oh, cool, I can go build airplanes and cars. And my first internship was offered at Ford. And then I had another offer from like a software company in LA, in Pasadena, that made software for mechanical engineers. And so when I showed up there, it was like, hey, you're doing mechanical engineering manually and validating the software. It was essentially like a testing job. But then very quickly, like, I would find these issues and then I'd be like, how do we fix them? And I started talking to some of the software guys and I was like, wow, I can do this. And so then I sort of just started fixing. So by the end of the little summer internship, I was just fixing bugs. And again, I'm writing Java code or whatever we were doing back then. And that was just, again, more fun than and so at that point I was like, man, this software stuff's way better. Cause like, these dudes are writing software to go build like some part for some airplane that may ship in 10 years. Yet I'm doing software that's like, I'm seeing the change in like 10 seconds. I make a change, it works, I edit it, debug it. And to me, it was just that rapid sort of like quick fire thing. And I think at some level that what's attracts me so deeply to Web3 is that the real-time nature, it never shuts down. It's constantly trading. There's financial involved. It's like this perfect mix between like financial sort of engineering and sort of the finance side of it combined with product building and community build. Like, it's just kind of a dream, like, intersection for me. But yeah, the switch to software was sort of by accident. Like, I worked for a software company and didn't realize it, that I would love that more.
Yeah, that's interesting because again, we had an interview the other day with Ivan from Mindfolk, and we were talking about college and careers, and like, it's funny how each one of us, and you just said you went to school for one thing, but ended up going a different direction. And so like, I love drawing that red thread because again, I think possibilities are endless in anything that we do. And when we find something that we're good at and we have passion around, it allows us the opportunity to kind of grow and we immerse ourselves in it, right? Like you said, you'll stay up late. You were up early this morning doing emails, finding solutions, doing all that stuff. How did you transition that like passion and that, the nature of always being on into starting to make money? Yeah, again, you said Ford and then software, but like, what was that next like part of their journey?
Yeah, I've always I was investing the money I made. I didn't spend a lot in college. And so I was always like, kind of like the investing thing was interesting to me. But I think when it finally clicked for me, it was a side thing I was doing. So company out of business, the one that I was working for in LA, they're like, hey, go cash your check. Company's gonna go bankrupt. We're gonna file in like 4 hours. So do that before 4 hours before the accounts are frozen. Ended up getting a job in Silicon Valley, moving up here, was just sleeping in my brother's apartment because he was already living up here for a while. And to me, like, I was working at a software company, but on the side, I started like had a blog, and so I still have like my own blog or whatever, like that I don't really write on anymore. But like, I'd put some AdSense on it, and then I'd put some and people click on them, and I'm like, oh, I made like 10 cents today. I'm like, that's kind of crazy. I'm like, nobody even knows this website. And then I'm like, then I learned about advertising. I'm like, oh, if you advertise, I'm like, why don't I just advertise my blog? And then I would advertise it and spend $1, and somebody would click on it, and I'd make 25 cents. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, what if I can close that spread? And that is what clicked my model of like, how do you get people to come to a website, incent them, pay them whatever, and then how do you make money on the website? And so that sort of notion went deep down the rabbit hole in like affiliate marketing, and built one of the other companies, just a huge website portfolio in the early 2000s, and that to me like really kicked off like this whole model of like making money online and just building businesses. And again, today, even like as much as I am like quote unquote an engineer by training and like have been self-taught from the software side, like I deeply enjoy the idea of solving like business problems, and technology is a tool to just achieve that faster. And so for me, it was like, oh, how can I write scripts to automate ad making or automate content making or whatever? And now a lot of what we do, even in Web3, and if you think of through my career, is like, I figured I could have more impact by having, bigger teams or more people writing software, broadly working on solving a business problem. But it was that moment of like, ad on website, somebody clicks on it, like they gave me 10 cents. And then I, was buying ads for a few cents. They would come and also click on those ads. And I'm like, okay, this is a magical thing. Like, but it's, it was basically the first version of like, and everybody was joked. I was like, it's just connecting buyers and sellers, right? Like somebody's buying something, somebody's selling something, and how are you making that efficient? And then, really, really large scale automation of that with just like hundreds of credit cards on like Microsoft Ad Center and like lots of ad accounts. Like we were doing ringtones and like a lot of the like really early days of like just affiliate marketing, a lot of clothing stuff. Like people would look for like a music brand or something, and then we would send them to, these various sites that sold clothing tied to them or merch or things like that. And again, I just learned about like, how do you just do high friction or high velocity, low friction sort of notion of like just commerce online. And then in the, on my sort of day jobs was building these sort of larger Web 2 companies. And again, thinking about how do you make that business more efficient and using technology as the wedge.
So a lot of your focus, I have noticed in the time getting to know you, has been looking for feedback always. And part of that has been how do we make things more efficient, but also taking valuable feedback in sentiment from a community that you're working with. How does that come into play when you're working not only as an individual, but with teams that you've decided to work with? So back then when you were working with various, Web 2 platforms, not just today's team that you're working with now, but what is the team culture like that you look for when you're doing that, and the feedback you look from with your core team as well as from your audience?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it evolved over time. I think in the early days, like it was very individual. Like I was like, how do I become the best on my team so that you would become a manager or whatever, because you're the best. And like for me, it was always about like trying to have the answer. And so like when somebody would come in and say, hey, we need somebody to do this, like I always wanted to answer it. It was like this sort of like, shiny apple kid in the front of the room raising their hand kind of model. And that turned into like the more answers you got, the more reps you got, the more people came to you, the more they asked it, then you would kind of find out. So you sort of built up the network of knowledge. And then also just people relied on you more. And then that sort of like, you sort of could get promoted in your first couple, sort of going from individual contributor up to like managing a team. But as the teams got larger, that became less of a strategy that worked, because it wasn't about could you answer it or be the fastest. It was like, could you work on more ambiguous and more like larger complex problems? And for me, the way to do that was like, you had to find that those problems existed, but you also had to have people coming to you, asking you to go solve those problems and have the bandwidth to go achieve it. And so for me, it became like in the last, let's say 5 or 7 years running teams where there's hundreds of engineers, it was like, how can you build your leadership team to be as independent and sort of like vision driven as possible, where it's like, hey, look, this is your area, you own it. Like, just call me when you need help, and have the relationship where people actually would, like your, direct reports would call you and you wouldn't need to check in. And so there wasn't this like, it was a pretty low bandwidth sort of relationship, but high signal in the sense when they did call, there was a real problem and you went and solved it together. But it allowed me to like almost hyper delegate. And my sort of model is like, rather than thinking of myself as like, hey, you're the boss of this big team, or you're this like VP level kind of person running a big division, but thinking myself as an advisor, and like all of the teams that work under me are like, I'm just advising them as if I was like an investor or a board member. And so you want to send them as much business as possible, right? So you want to like find connections in the organization, in other teams, to give them work. So if they're building a platform, how do you get more people using that platform? If they're solving UI problems, how do you get more people, sending them UI problems? And then you want that business to do as good as possible. So hire the best talent. So you teach like how to hire, how to mentor. And so for me, like that sort of hyper delegation and constantly putting myself out of a job. So like in theory, like I should have very little individual responsibility, because I've delegated that in a way that allows me to spend time looking for new opportunities or solving where there's problems. And I think that weirdly, where you think about it, you're like, man, you're the laziest boss ever. You like have no job, you're not doing anything. But what was insane is over like now 3 or 4 organizations, both Microsoft, and then at Instacart, and the 2 largest last ones, became incredibly empowering for the people on my team. Like it was very tricky to be on my team because like I would just constantly give them stuff, but if they could handle it and work through it, and then when they had issues would come back, they grew way faster. So then my goal became not like how can I make myself any better? It was how can I make myself more transparent, where that they would get more authority, more responsibility, their career would grow, they would get promoted or, and grow quickly. And then that in turn sort of allowed my group to sort of, oh, wait, can you go take over that one and help them get the same model? Oh, there's another big project. We would get that project. And so it kind of fell into it. And now it's like almost, a little more automatic.
Yeah, it's interesting what I hear. And again, I shared with you before, and those of you that don't know, like I was a college volleyball coach for 8 years, right? And to me, it reminds me a lot of good athletic departments and then good head coaches, right? So I was always an assistant coach, but any head coach that I had talked to, they said that it was their role and their responsibility to be able to bring in the people, surround themselves with people that lift them up in areas that maybe they're not as good at. And then on top of that, it's their ultimate goal for them, for the people below them to achieve their goals and dreams, right? So like, again, as an assistant coach, if it's my dream to be a head coach, the head coach is going to go ahead and help mentor, give the roles and responsibilities and help lift them up. And then if you look at across like a whole athletic department, right? Like I view you almost as an AD type role to where you're like, okay, hey, I've got all these people working underneath me, each sport, each program. Like, look, you know what our overall mission and vision is, and go do it. I'm here to support. But the one I wrote down, relationship, you said that 2 or 3 times. And that's a key word for me, being in relationship with people, whether you're working for them, with them, or just out there. And I want to know, like, where did that come from for you? And where did you determine that being in relationship was a key piece to your success?
Yeah. In the first job that I got in Silicon Valley, so moved up here, I was working for a guy, Satish, who is now a venture, like a VC. And, he trusted me to go do this job, like a few weeks in, like fly to Europe and go solve some bugs for one of our big clients, British Telecom. I had been on the job a couple of weeks, really didn't know much, but I'm like, hey, I'll learn on the way. Read the book on the flight over, kind of thing, of how to do this certain mobile programming. And ever since that day, he just trusted me. He was always and again, this is through many companies that he founded companies and then he sold that to Yahoo. And then he always, you created this sort of I would always take his call, always follow, and then similarly, vice versa, he would always take my text or call. And I think that notion of having people that are just really dedicated and you have that high bandwidth sort of trust, I saw over time, and a lot of the people that were the best on our team at that time, he had worked with him before. And so my partner and I, JJ, who's been my business partner for 20 some years before, DeGods, we sort of started to capture this same thing where it's wait, if you treat people right and you take care of them, they will continue to work for you. And it just created this really symbiotic relationship where it's if you treat people in a good way and you pay them well and fairly, and they have good opportunities and they grow around you, you'll have the opportunity to work with them again. And I think that created this model where it's how do you, how do you just build the type of organization where that's a very positive and self-reinforcing relationship. Oh, the better work that we do, Kevin grows. The better work that Kevin does, he gives to me, then I grow. And that sort of model continues to feed itself. And then when I leave the role and I'm hey, I'm going to go to a new company, it should be essentially very little impact on the org because I've already built all these strong leaders. All of them sort of just automatically sort of move up a level and take on that responsibility. But that requires a really high trust. And again, that becomes with the relationship of going through troubles over time, but also seeing those successes.
So we've talked a lot about the ups and downs here, about these relationships and mostly how they evolve into successes. But have any of these dynamics been momentary or prolonged struggles that you can recall? Do you have a particular relationship or a business model that was a struggle for you for any amount of time before you could really turn it into something successful, or something that sticks with you that you had a difficult time with?
Yeah, there's definitely, probably my personals, being too good at work, like also makes that more fun than, sometimes solving your personal problems. And I think so, like on the personal side, like family and dad and stuff, I probably struggle a lot more there. Um, because like I get so much like positive reinforcement out of like being good at work, in a super broad, like, but silly sense. Um, like work struggles, I think, come in the sense of like really challenging sort of employee situations of misalignment. And I think both that I have an expectation that doesn't align with what the individual wants, whether that's a peer, an employee, a boss, whatever. And then I think conversely, with them not being self-aware in terms of what they want or where they think they should be, right? Somebody that wants to be a people manager that maybe doesn't have is missing some of the skills, or someone that wants to lead a project or that again is missing some of the skills, or a lot of times what you find is that like, is it lack of motivation because there's something else in your life that's going on that makes that troubling? But I think if you think about, so those are like what I would say the human factors, are like the sort of very personal things that are either my own personal things or like sort of folks that I've worked with. I think on the business side, a lot of the struggles end up with, for myself, like, like at VMware, we had reached, this was like, so we had sold a couple companies before that, and we ended up at VMware. And, I just didn't have alignment with where they wanted to take the team. And I sort of dug in my heels, and that sort of essentially drove me out of there. They essentially laid me off, kind of like, not really fired, but I essentially got laid off because they're like, oh, we want to sell this company. We want you to go with this private equity thing. And I'm like, no, I don't think I want to do that anymore. I want to do this. And they're like, well, we don't want you to do this, so we lay you off. And I think at the time, like, those are pretty painful sort of like experiences, because I misread sort of some of the situations. I probably should have just quit. Like at that point, just, hey, it went away. But I sort of was like, no, I really want to do this. And like the company's like, hey, I don't want you to do that. And I think when I reach those sort of, inflection points now, I realize that, hey, my motivation is better to go somewhere else. And so then instantly I start thinking of like, hey, I should just go do something else and put myself back in control. And so I think those are the types of experiences where I've like felt the most misaligned at work, where it's like what I want to achieve is either not possible because the political or organizational or sort of just the corporate interest is not in that view. And I can't get the decision behind me. So I think I've grown to like just realize that that's going to happen at times, and be okay with that. But I think in the moment, it's pretty painful to realize that either you're unwanted or you're not needed. I think there's like that emotional sort of feeling that's pretty emptying. But I think again, I'm stubborn in that sense, that where I'm like, that can't be true. So I'll just gonna like, like you refuse to believe that's where you got. And so I think those are the kind of examples where I think I've gotten wound up and emotionally sort of like stuck, right, in some of that in terms of solving it.
I can absolutely relate to that in my corporate history, where I should have just left when I had control of the situation, but I didn't want to be a quitter. There was a little bit of that in me. I didn't want the situation to fail, and that's definitely more of working from your emotions rather than from your logical center. And I've grown past that. Like you mentioned, you've put that in retrospective, and you've learned how to put yourself in front of that now. And I have too. But I have had a couple of those situations where I left a company not on my terms when I would have preferred to, but I stuck it out longer than I should have and so I definitely relate to that. And it's also part of the reason why I really enjoy working in this industry in Web3. So I'm glad you shared that. Definitely relatable. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this episode can relate to that too.
Yeah. And a lot of it's just reach out and talk to somebody. And I think that was a mistake that I probably made more than than not. I think like this year, end of last year, now definitely this part of first year, like as we see a lot of layoffs and like a lot of like sort of shifts in the economy, like a lot of companies are struggling, which means there's a lot of founders that are struggling. Um, and it's tough, right? Because part of you is like you want to do good for like your investors, your employees, your constituents, your customers, et cetera. And you feel like you're sort of carrying this burden on your shoulders. And part of that, sometimes you want to believe that you can make it work. And I think at a lot of times the best answer is to admit that like you need help and like want to reach out, because the thing that's I think painful, and I've seen this and read stories a lot about it, where like you reach the point where like now it's actually not possible to fix it. And if you would have said, hey, I need help, or I'm not sure what to do, and like there was probably more options available to you if you would have like raised your hand and asked. And I think that is an area that a lot of founders, definitely early founders, but even sometimes sophisticated ones, don't want to admit that they don't have all the information or they don't have an answer, and they really want they want to try to solve it themselves, and then it gets too far too late. You're out of money, you're out of runway. It just, the market's moved to a point that now the options that were available to you 6 months ago aren't. And so I think for me, it's, you know, if there's a message in that, it's like, be willing to ask for mentors, be asked for help, go ask people, you know, that are in similar shoes, or maybe they're not. Like a lot of times, actually Frank's really good at this, and it's something we do a lot, where when I'm struggling to think about something or write something up, a lot of times he's like, just let me interview you. He starts asking the question like, hey, what is this? What do you mean? What do you want them to know? Why are you saying that? Well, does that really make sense? Is that really what you want them to do? And like just talking out like a sort of a potential issue with someone else who's got, you know, some cursory knowledge. And sometimes even if they have zero knowledge, I'll tell a friend that I don't work with anymore about something. And surprisingly, many times they're like, oh, that's ridiculous. Like, go this, why haven't you done this? And you're like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it from that perspective, or like look in the other person's shoes. And so I do think just having someone to talk to as you go through struggles, like that is an undervalued, but also underutilized sort of like technique that I'm still not perfect with. But I think like every time I do it, I'm like, man, I should do this more often.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, go.
I just wanted to say the impulse to not show weakness when you're struggling because you think that will make you struggle more is insane, right? That human energy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Coach.
I completely agree with what Gogo said, and on top of that, Kevin, I appreciate like the little bit of vulnerability from the personal side of things, right? Like as a husband and as a father, right? Like those are things that I struggle with. How do I show up? And I love what you said about connecting with other people that may be in the shoes or may not, and offer a different perspective. Because I think that, you know, the more we're open to receive, that's why we're doing this, right? Your journey may help somebody along the way just by virtue of what you've shared. So you were talking about Frank, and I know that I want to make sure that we're cognizant of time and everything. And like, I want to get to where you're at right now and kind of your current situation and kind of let everybody know. Most people know, but we're also talking to a lot of Web 2 people and we're bringing people around. So I'd like for you to explain where you're at, what's going on right now with you and the project, and kind of go from there.
Yeah. So I think, we've got these two NFT projects. So DeGods has been out for 15 months now. y00ts has been out for 4 or 5 months. And that was the second project. And then around the same time as y00ts, we sort of made a decision to spin out the technology side of the business, or the technology core of that business, with the idea of not only building technology for our own NFT projects, but broadly, you know, other projects, and whether those are projects that are already in Web3 or projects that are sort of thinking about coming from Web2. And then, you know, Christmas, we announced that we'd be moving the blockchain, so the underlying tech, from DeGods and y00ts to different blockchains. And I think as part of that has opened up a whole round of conversations around, you know, potential new partners that are in those other ecosystems, but also just a lot more like sort of what I would call traditional Web2 brands that have started a Web3 journey of some sense, but maybe just haven't built the sort of community or following, or looking for a way to sort of amplify that. And I think that has led to some really interesting conversations that, you know, we hope to sort of, you know, be able to announce in the future. But I think from a project perspective, I think, we're still a relatively small team in the grand scheme of things. And for us, it's, this notion of having to, as a small team, you have to focus, right? And so I think figuring out like, what are the things that we're innately good at? What are the things that we have bandwidth for in the short term? And then how can we, do the stuff that fits with our current alignment so that we still move on the broader vision, which, we believe that, in the next decade, more and more companies and users will come into Web3. And again, that's sort of buzzwordy. It's like really just like we think of the blockchain technology, this sort of notion of an, more permissionless, more ownerless sort of data structure or data pipeline will be powering, whether it's finance parts, inventory, communications, marketing, just different aspects of different businesses. Just like we couldn't have predicted 20 years ago how the internet or the cell phone or social media would impact sort of businesses and brands today. We think there's a lot of opportunity for these use cases to sort of be expanded. And today they're pretty early, right? Like it's just a lot of like experimentation, even though some people would like to believe that they've reached full product market fit.
I love that you all come to this approach from the idea of experimentation and that you embrace it, because honestly, that's what a majority of businesses do in Web3, crypto, NFTs. It's a lot of seeing what fits and really testing the market, because the market is changing every day. So when you come to the market and see, okay, what is the best product market fit and product consumer fit, that changes from week to week. It changes from month to month. So you do have to come at it from an experimental point of view. And the decision to move blockchains is probably one of the biggest experiments anyone has seen from any chain. No one's really done it before. And not only did you move to one other blockchain, but to two, forking off in different directions. But everyone has seen that Dust Labs and DeGods, everything that you guys have done from early on has been a branding approach. It's a culture. And other projects can say that they're a culture, but I don't think anyone else works as hard to be a brand and to try new things. I'm really curious, and I don't know if anybody else really knows the story of how you and Frank met and you were able to come on to the team as the CEO of D Labs. I know you've spread a little bit here and there as little breadcrumbs, but how that origin story happened for you and what keeps you here on the team, like why is this your passion project now?
Yeah, so so Frank and I both went to UCLA, different decades. And so one of the things that I was doing, just in general as part of like my Web2 journey was more just like doing a lot of angel investing. And I spent a lot of time with sort of these college recruitment models, but also just investing in college startups. And so there was a kind of an alumni UCLA type event here in the Bay Area. And it was celebrating startups that had went through a summer program at UCLA. And so I met Frank there, and him and his team, there's 5 of the founders. We're all young guys working on a startup together. Sort of like it was called Duffel. They were doing basically college delivery into like dorms. And so they would basically do like local campus, like 10-minute delivery or 5-minute delivery, which was pretty cool for snacks and things like that. And getting a bunch of traction on UCLA's campus. Now it's much bigger. They're on a bunch of different campuses, companies still running. And so at the time I was like, asking them, giving them help, giving them advice of things that I heard, but also kind of challenge them. I'm like, man, like you guys are really gonna have to push this to the next level if you really want to be successful. And they did. They, applied for Y Combinator, which is kind of like the Harvard of startup incubators here in the Valley, and they got accepted very late in the process, which was pretty cool. And they moved up to the Valley, and I think 4 of the 5 dropped out of school. I think 1 maybe finished and 1 was almost done, but to go focus on that. Ended up raising venture capital. And so along the way, I was really just a friend of them and a mentor and sort of like an advisor, and they would hit me up with crazy ideas. And Frank always says he would only do it when he knew he had something really good to give me, right? And so he would always like wanted to bring me good news or something really exciting so that we would kind of chew on it and we would chat about stuff. And during COVID, that business sort of paused because all the students went home from campus. So Frank and another couple of founders left. A couple other guys stayed that are still running the business. And Frank started consulting, doing some growth hacking stuff, Bitcoin stuff, and then kind of got into NFTs in that sense. Had a couple of friends that were doing it, and started DeGods. And then along the way, I just kind of kept in touch with these folks. And then this summer we said, hey, look, if there's an opportunity to like really take it to be like, go raise investment, go build like a proper kind of software company, more like my background, I'd be down to go work on it. Cause he was always like, oh, just come work with us. We'll do DeGods. And I'm like, dude, I don't get it. Like, it's just a few artists. It was such a small team and so different from what I'd done. I'm like, I don't know if I could be that helpful, to be honest. And, but then when we came up with the Dust Labs vision of like spinning out a software company, that made a bunch of sense. And so, we raised venture capital and we're off on the journey, and, really exciting kind of year ahead of us.
I mean, you kind of obviously broad brush stroked it, and like I love because I'm picturing all of this stuff, and I know that there's a lot more that we can dig in on, but obviously being cognizant of time and making sure that, because again, you are a busy guy. We do know that we've got meetings and we've got stuff that you have to get to. I'll boldly ask, maybe we do a follow-up at some point in time, because I do think that, people would want to hear a little bit more. We got the first part of your story, and then, I mean, heck, maybe we get you and we can get a couple of guys on and do, dig a little bit deeper, because I would love to learn more. I'm not a holder yet. I'll say that. I'll say yet. We'll go from there. But like, I want to thank you, and I want to give a Gogo an opportunity to kind of show you some flowers. But, Kevin, thank you for taking the time, being a little bit vulnerable, sharing your journey with us, because again, this doesn't happen in this space all that often. People know you as, Kevin from Dust Labs, but nobody knows a little bit about your journey. So I want to thank you for sharing that with us. And, with that, I want to kind of kick it over to Gogo to close, and so we can get you on out of here.
Yeah, I'd love to come back. So I'm super fired up. This has been great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us some of your time, Kevin. I know time is super valuable for you. And we would love to do a follow-up with you and some of the team, especially the team that doesn't get to speak to the audience that often. We would love to talk with you guys. I know that was something exciting for you when we were talking, pre-recording. So absolutely would love to do that. Love to hear some of your stories growing up. Today was super, super important and wonderful. And thank you so much for being our second guest of the Roadmap. We're truly honored.
I love it. I'm excited to see more of these.
This is going to be awesome. Hey, Kevin, before we stop recording and kick it off, where can people follow you or connect with you?
Kevin DeGods on Twitter is probably the easiest spot, and then dustlabs.com or degods.com.
Perfect. We'll link those in the show notes and everything. Kevin, we thank you so much, man. We appreciate you. We're going to hold you to doing this again, and we'll let you get out of here, man. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Roadmap. We're honored to host such fantastic guests every week and help share their stories with a wide audience.
We hope you enjoyed tuning in. And if you did, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channels. You can find us at The Roadmap Show on YouTube and Twitter, and The Roadmap.show on Instagram.
We'll join you again next week for another amazing conversation.
I'm Coach. She's Gogo. Thanks for being a part of our roadmap.